That might not be a bad strategy.
It's what's the idea is that they never suggest that they are suggesting.
As talented and also as did you say active adjustments forms of
They have been called out some of their smaller practices. They've given. It's weird that the bigger they get, the more credible they are, which isn't weird.
Yeah, but no, that's
they give a lecture. They give a lecture at a smaller university for the third-year economics class, and students figure it out immediately. This is one of their stunts or campaigns from 2 or 3 years ago. The Yes Men are two activists who are very good at pretending to be someone in power. Basically, they, I believe, contacted BBC International and said, I'm the spokesperson from Dow Chemical, and we have an important announcement to make about the 16th anniversary of the Bhopal disaster in India. And unfortunately, for the BBC's sake, no one did a background check and realized these aren't actual Dow people, these are pranksters. So they were on air on the BBC and basically said, for the first time, we are taking full responsibility for the disaster, and we'll be spending, we will liquidate Union Carbide and spend that $12 billion to start to undo some of the damage. So they're very well known for these kinds of stunts where they assume the mantle of power and no one questions them, and then when they have that platform, they really play it quite straight. Except the fact that Dow, of course, had to go on the air the next day and say, not only did they not work for Dow, but we're never doing that. So our discussion of the group,
yeah, and maybe
I'd just like to jump in and clarify a bit. That's a very great summary. But the Yes Men, they make websites that look like these big powerful people. So they own the website domain dowethics.com. They make it look exactly like Dow, and then the BBC contacts their website, and they say, yes, we are Dow, and then they go in. And so that's how they kind of stumbled into it, is making websites that really closely mirror the real websites for these companies. And the first time they were contacted to speak, they thought it was a great opportunity, and they did it, and it's kind of become their thing. They're getting very good at it. So BBC didn't seek them out. They just accepted the invitation that they didn't research enough in the first place.
Any kind of thoughts around, obviously we gave you a lot to talk about, and obviously we're not going to have time to go through all of the conversations you just had, but maybe even just some of the key issues that came up for you around the strategies and what worked and what didn't, those kind of things. So.
Yeah, well, I think it was very effective at exposing kind of the absurdity of everyday news discourse, where you have corporations saying things that are so unethical, and then if you put something ethical into that setting, it becomes shocking to people, right? It sort of defamiliarizes them. And we said that one of the so that was one of the really positive things. One of the possibly negative things was that it would have negative impacts on the interns and the people working at BBC who were pranked. And another one is that it would be very hard to generalize this strategy because of the level of acting skills and the level of organizational skills you need to pull this off. So maybe very effective in raising the issue and getting in contact with people, but it's not like everybody can do this, right? And eventually it will get old, everybody will know who the Yes Men are, and then when they try to pull a prank, the news organization will just say, hey, wait, I know you. So, yeah.
And I think I walked around when you guys were saying that on some level that factor makes it a very short-term strategy.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself can be problematic because it's not a long-term way to really achieve that social change. It might instigate something, but that it potentially has, it has a duration, right?
Yeah, and we also thought it was kind of limited in the way it would be able to build solidarity amongst its audience. So it's kind of a spectacle, and it doesn't really create long-term sort of organization.
It does manage to call attention very blatantly to the imbalance, the ludicrous disproportionate information flow, which calls the whole apparatus into question publicly. So that's good.
And it brought it back to the public forum,
Yeah.
because it was off, like Dow wasn't ready to make that statement, so we wouldn't have even heard about it again, and we would have now forgotten that this is what went on, so.
Yeah,
The other concern we did have as well is that we suspect that within sort of mainstream media discourses, in the week following the Yes Men, prank, the vast majority of stories would have been focused on the spectacle itself. Look what happened to our colleagues over the BBC, ha ha ha, and the story would move away from India and human tragedy and to the prank itself. That can be a limiting feature.
And then, sorry, I was just going to say one more quick successful strategy that I think came out of it would have been just calling attention to journalistic standards within the media institutions themselves. And then that being said, negative could be that it gives the BBC, which is one of, arguably a public institution, media institution that still has some positive credibility, lowers their credibility and their reputation on a global scale. So that would be the negative side of that one.
I was going to say, another thing in terms of the ethics of it, I was studying this last semester, this specific instance, and I think it's, I forget the exact numbers, but I think it was that within the time, because it only ran once more in the cycle of news, so it was more or less like on air and unquestioned for 2 hours. I think in that cycle, pretty much people started dumping stocks from Dow, and I think their company actually plummeted, I think it was 24% in 2 hours on the stock exchange. And so in a sense, people who had all their money invested in that, like, it could be good in the sense that you say, okay, like, maybe you shouldn't invest in this company because now you lost, like, I don't know, it's like $100,000 on the stock market. But at the same time, like, there's also that negative impact where people are going to say, well, it's yes man, it's like, it's their fault why I lost lots of money. So it's sort of, it's an interesting question of ethics. Like, is it actually a good thing that forced them to lose money, or is it a bad thing that happened? And so it's kind of I still have no idea, but I think about that.
Thanks for bringing up that point. The ethics is a very important part to keep in mind of the whole situation, because it's a very loaded stunt that they pulled, definitely. And I think their own public release said that they lost $2 billion total after they did this. That was their claim. So I didn't find anybody else backing that up.
And you guys may notice, obviously, this is ridiculously rough and obviously incomplete. And the terms successful and unsuccessful are completely debatable, but I'm just trying to keep track of what we're saying. And that idea that each one of these campaigns, they're complicated, right? That's why we brought them up. We didn't want to bring up stuff that was so simple and straightforward that it wasn't difficult. So thank you for that. But just so that you guys know, that's what I'm starting to chart here, and I'll put it up afterwards in proper slide format.
So does another group want to go second?
We saw like a couple minute, I think it was like a 5-minute clip from the movie, just the beginning, and then we read an excerpt. It was kind of like a summary at the end. And I don't know, from what we got out of that, we found that just a little clip like that and the text wasn't enough to give full-out analysis, but we tried our best. And what we got out of it, basically, that it was what the corporation did in this documentary was personalize a corporation as a person, like humanize it, and say, okay, this is a person with all the full rights as a person has in terms of you can buy and sell real estate and yada yada yada. You can be sued, but does that person now have that person has no ethics now? Their only goal really is to make profits and money and generate cash, but it has no moral standing. It has no boundaries in terms of ethics. It has what else?
Described it as a pathology. It
Yeah.
pathologized a corporation.
Saying it as like some kind of crazy person, right?
It said it had all the symptoms of that.
Symptoms of a really psychomaniac, so to speak, right? So it was making it very personal, okay? I think one of the things we should have talked about also is the way that the producers marketed documentary, like they made it a free download. So I think they had like over 500 million hits, something like that. 500,000 coming out with a full documentary and making money off box office tickets and stuff like that. So that's the method that they used, and I think that was pretty successful in that a lot of people got to know about it, and this whole buzz was generated through that like mass like sharing.
So its distribution was successful?
Distribution was successful.
But making money was unsuccessful.
Oh,
You can
she
buy it
knows
now.
more because she actually had a friend.
No.
Sorry, did you have something to?
Well, I was just going to say, for a documentary, it actually had a fairly good theatrical distribution, as I remember it. And whether or not the free download came before or after, I don't know. But that would be my assumption. But yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it was one of the most successful Canadian documentaries. I believe the most successful Canadian documentary in history in terms of revenues generated and views. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that it wasn't like the whole huge numbers of the Vancouver film community, independent film community, were involved in producing that, including myself. And it's quite funny because it was done out of like Mark Akbar's converted garage. Like that's where it was produced. And so it wasn't to say like on Canadian terms that means something potentially different, right? To say that something was financially successful. There's still many struggles that come along with it, and how it was produced is certainly still financially challenging. So yeah, so it's kind of both sides. Well, it was originally a 3-part series for TV Ontario, and then they ended up getting funding for other things as they started to get more and more subjects on board. But anyway, someone had their hand raised here.
Oh, well, it's based on a book by Joe Bacan at UBC. So it was his, the book's way better than the movie, but they're both really good, really. It's really good. Yeah. And corporations are truly, in law, considered a person. So that, they took that up, that's true.
I think we also talked about some of the disadvantages that perhaps this documentary can have. And with what we got from that 5-minute clip, we thought maybe that it was a little narrow-minded too. It wasn't really broad, and it showed all the evil aspects of a corporation, but maybe there are some corporations out there that are kind of morally, okay. And well, again, maybe they touched that in the documentary, but from what we saw, it looked like very one-sided.
Yeah, we have to apologize for giving you a 5-minute clip of a
I know,
2.5-hour feature
Yeah.
film.
So it was
do
hard
this.
to be really objective.
Of course.
There's also there's like more to the corporation than just the documentary, and there's all these attached educational elements that I think is what makes it still relevant, and because it's a very like teachable entity that the documentary itself, plus all this supporting materials. And I think the supporting materials is what keeps it alive now, and why they get the free downloads, because
Actually, we touched on that, how it was actually like an educational tool, and it pointed out a lot of things about a corporation that maybe some people didn't know about, especially if we're looking at target audiences, maybe like shareholders of corporations, people who work in corporations, policymakers, and even CEO, like company executives, right? So, yeah, educational tool, for sure.
Cool. Great. So I think we should, unless anyone has something they'd really like to add to that, I think we should need to move on. But you kind of just.
Well, yeah, I just thought that it was really good for the film to focus on the corporation as an individual, like this legal mythology, because that's why you have like the Citizens United case where they say that it's infringing on free speech if the corporation can't spend as much money as it wants to on election spending, because they're considered a person, right? And that's really important. And so, yeah, I think it was a really good way to go.
On a really quick note, we talk about pathologizing the corporation. I do see a bit of a parallel with sort of some of the fear tactics we were talking about at the beginning of the session, where if we imagine the exact opposite, which is if you disagree with capitalism, it is because you are insane. That does a tremendous amount of damage to perceptions of mental health, and to flip that around and say, well, if you act this way, it's because you are crazy. It's because there's some real problematic discourse there about sanity and the insane and the mentally unwell.